Hello and welcome back to Geopolitics Worldwide. In 2022, when Vladimir Putin launched Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, estimates suggested that Russia had around 3,000 tanks ready for combat. 2 years later, Ukraine had destroyed a similar number of Russian tanks, essentially neutralizing Russia's initial armored force. In 2022, it was also estimated between 300,000 and 350,000 Russian soldiers were stationed at the front lines. 2 years into the war, Russians' casualties are estimated to be at the same range, meaning that the entire initial invasion force has effectively been wiped out. In essence, for every Russian soldier seen invading Ukraine in early footage of the war, a Russian soldier has since been killed or incapacitated. Russia has continued fighting despite these losses, relying on reserves of men and equipment, as well as producing replacements. However, its ability to sustain this rate of attrition is now seriously in question. Looking at Russian tanks, the numbers tell a grim story. Russia has lost over 3,000 tanks in 2 years, averaging 1,500 losses per year. Yet it can only produce around 500 to 600 new tanks annually, meaning that, at best, Russia has managed to replace just 1,200 tanks in total since the start of the war. In terms of raw numbers, this suggests Russia's current tank force is less than half of what it was at the outset, not accounting for the critical loss of experienced tank crews, which takes years to train. A similar trend is visible in armored vehicles. Russia has lost close to 9,000 armored vehicles, about 4,500 per year. On paper, Russia has kept pace with these losses by producing around 4,500 new vehicles annually. However, many of these replacements are not new, but are refurbished Soviet-era vehicles taken from scrapyards, as verified by satellite images. These relics from the Soviet Union, though still usable in some cases, are significantly outdated and offer little protection against modern Ukrainian weapons like drones and Javelin missiles. In many battlefield situations, they prove ineffective, often being destroyed by even small arms fire due to their poor condition and lack of upgrades. While these refurbished vehicles temporarily fill gaps in Russia's numbers, they cannot bridge the gap in quality. Moreover, even the stopgap measure will soon falter, as Russia's stockpile of Soviet-era vehicles is running low. Estimates suggest that Russia can maintain its current replacement rate only until early 2025. After that, they will have to refurbish even older and more deteriorated equipment, slowing down their ability to replace the losses. By 2026, Russia's Soviet stockpiles will likely be almost completely depleted, further weakening its ground forces. In response to these shortages, Russia has resorted to increasingly vulnerable solutions. One of the more bizarre adaptations has been the use of unarmored vehicles, such as off-road carts to transport soldiers to the battlefield. These vehicles, which lack any form of protective armor or even doors, are extremely susceptible to being picked off by drones or simple gunfire. This marks a step down from the previously ineffective Russian vehicle, the Loaf, a cheap Soviet-era van similar to a Volkswagen bus. While the Loaf is relatively inexpensive and easy to produce, it lacks of armor, and exposed fuel tanks have made it a death trap for Russian troops, as Ukrainian drones have found and exploited these weaknesses. The Loaf is not alone on the battlefield. Lightweight all-terrain vehicles, or ATVs, and unarmored motorcycles are increasingly being used by Russian forces, both for troop transport and logistics. However, these motorcycles, often loaded with artillery rounds, also pose serious risk to the drivers. Despite their vulnerabilities, Russia continues to use them in a swarm strategy, sending multiple vehicles to ensure at least a few make it to their destination, even though they know some will be destroyed along the way. This starkly illustrates Russia's growing desperation to make up for its lack of armored transport. Russia's manpower problem is just as dire. While Russia has not yet completely out of soldiers, its ability to replace those lost in combat is weakening. Earlier in the war, Putin increased the maximum mobilization age from 60 to 70, a move that reflects Russia's dwindling pool of younger men. Russia's population has been in a slow decline for years, with not enough young people to replenish its workforce or its military ranks. By the start of the war, Russia had around 7 million men in their 20s. Since then, between battlefield casualties and the exodus of men fleeing conscription, Russia's pool of able-bodied young men has shrunk significantly. These young men are not just needed for the military, they're also essential to the Russian economy. They work in industries, pay taxes, and are expected to start families to ensure the future population of Russia. But the war has killed or displaced many of them, exacerbating Russia's demographic decline. With each passing day, the demographic crisis worsens, as many of the young people who would have started families are instead dying in combat. Experts predict that if this trend continues, Russia will lose the ability to conduct major offensives within 6 to 10 years, meaning that this war could be Russia's last significant military endeavor for a long time. Instead of backing down in the face of these problems, Putin has become more aggressive. He appears to be operating with a "use them while you've got them" mindset, pushing Russia's remaining resources, both in terms of equipment and personnel, to their limits, recognizing the long-term implications of this demographic collapse. Putin has begun promoting policies aimed at boosting the population. He's called for Russian women to have large families, a nod to old imperialist ideas where a large population served as a source of soldiers for expansionist wars. Beyond its ground forces, Russia's losses in the air and naval domains are also severe. Since the start of the invasion, Russia has lost almost a third of its Black Sea fleet, with Ukraine, a country with no naval fleet of its own, inflicting the damage through asymmetric means like drones and anti-ship missiles. As a result, Russia has been forced to relocate much of its remaining fleet out of Ukrainian missile range, effectively rendering its Black Sea fleet functionally inactive. The Russian Air Force has fared no better. Over the course of 2 years, Russia has lost at least 342 aircraft and 325 helicopters, a staggering number for a nation that supposedly has the second most powerful air force in the world. Compounding this issue, Russia is rapidly depleting the operational lifespans of its planes through constant use, and by the end of the year, it's expected to retire an additional 60 aircraft due to overuse, with only a third being replaced. To make matters worse, many new planes are being flown by inexperienced pilots, leading to even higher loss rates. Russia's once feared air defense systems are also faltering. Its top-of-the-line S-400 systems have proven inadequate against Ukrainian rockets, and Russia has lost nearly half of these units since the war began. Ukraine is now destroying the remaining systems at an average of 1 per day, just as Western air support, including F-16 fighter jets, are expected to arrive in Ukraine soon. Faced with the cumulative losses across its tanks, armored vehicles, naval forces, and air force, Russia has shifted to a defensive posture, trying to hold onto the territory it seized. However, given the scale of its losses, it's unclear if Russia can maintain control over these areas for much longer. This war has come at a devastating cost for Russia, with an economy smaller than Italy's, raising questions about how much longer it can sustain such attrition.